We are going to talk about adoption of cloud in banking environment. Topic is quite vast and not many things apply to this topic. In this topic, different session, different panels and all, I'll start with a background about adoption of cloud. In many industries, as you know, cloud is giving the path for innovation and digital drive, providing innovation in terms of how you do business, how do you optimize your costs, how do you run your new initiatives, and also how do you bring the customer experience all together. My question to my colleagues on the panel is about, given the thought that we have got technology available to us on cloud, which is highly secure and available to all of us, what is going to drive the adoption of cloud in a large scale in banking environment? And what do you think is the road ahead to start with? Maybe I want to start first with Jagdish.
Thank you. Thanks very much, and very happy to be on this elite panel. So yes, cloud adoption is now more given. It's not something which is really optional or something that people are sort of thinking about or maybe wondering if or not if and that kind of stuff. The key drivers at this stage are definitely, one, the scalability, the availability, and the cost aspects. Typically, the often ignored one when we move large workloads performing very high levels of performance on the cloud is the cost aspect as well. Because as long as it is a pure storage cost, it's easy to compute and figure out what those costs are. But once it gets into compute costs, then the cloud costs start getting a little hard to understand. The second thing, of course, is the compatibility from an integration perspective. It's given that not all applications will necessarily be cloud ready. There will be few, there will be few others that are not ready. And two, applications that are cloud ready will also not necessarily be compatible with all cloud service providers, which means that we will necessarily need to have an architecture that is in a position to support multiple clouds if required, and also the ability to move workloads across if and when the situation demands. And that's a very, very hard thing to do because moving workloads is not easy. But these aspects need to be borne in mind while designing the architecture for a cloud solution so that at least the inherent risks involved in these things are known, they're measured, and they're adequately mitigated or addressed before taking all the workloads onto the cloud. That's really the primary considerations because availability of software is just there right now, so that's not a major issue.
Technically, what you're saying is about having the right architecture on day one.
Absolutely.
To start with and become
that's
foundation.
That's the primary thing, to get the architecture straight first up front before getting on the workloads there.
Ramesh, your views?
No, I think he covered most of the points. But I think one thing I will say is the knowledge. I think 99% of the people know only cloud at surface, including people who sell, including people who buy. I think we have to put in more effort as an industry to make people understand what it is, right? My first interaction with cloud was around 10 years back. So if I say that I've done 10 years of cloud, it does look decently on my CV. But we were running an e-commerce business, right? It was very easy. We just did what we need to do. Because I went from banking to an e-commerce business, and then I thought it was very good. But when I came back to banking, we were ready, right? But we found out the industry was not ready. Because if you start quizzing people, the details, actually no one knows the details, right? My friend was joking, previously any tech guy after his career wanted to start a restaurant, now he wants to start a cloud company, right? So it has become a joke. So if you don't take it seriously, to his point, right? Why does compute cost we are not able to predict? Right? And someone told me, oh, no, you should switch it off on weekends. I said, then why do I need cloud if I need to switch it off on weekends, right? So I think we are stuck with not knowing what the knowledge is. Industry should help us because as an end user, we will be always lagging in terms of what the service provider can give us. So that gap is too huge. I think if that gap we are able to address, I think any financial institution is absolutely ready to go on cloud, we will solve architecture issues, we will solve things, but the transparency, which is the fundamental of what cloud is, I don't think it is there today, and that seems to be the biggest challenge for me.
So I'm taking another term called architecture and transparency from your discussion on that. Abhijit, your views.
I think there's, as you rightly said, there is a lot of cloud in the cloud, yeah. So a lot of confusion, and how to use it, what's the benefit that cloud brings to your infrastructure. So I think some years back we started off saying it might cost less, but slowly we realized that cost is not the only driver. What we feel and what we've seen, at least in our organization, is that we've gone with a cloud native solution, and the kind of benefits we have seen, from productivity, from, the way innovation is accessible, has made huge difference for our organization. So we are HDFC Limited, it's about a old organization, which is legacy organization, but going with cloud native solutions, the kind of customer service, the kind of benefits we are getting is huge. And that's core of it is, that many times innovation is within and it's also without, or outside you. And the cloud provides you that capability to look at some innovation which is available outside. Like, there are a number of fintechs we tie up with. So we run a innovation program where a lot of fintechs are actually taking a small problem, like let's say, the title problem of a property. And they solve this problem, and we are actually able to integrate with them and create a seamless journey for our customers as we move on. So what we've seen in our learnings is, one is certainly, that headache of system going down is not there anymore. So uptime certainly helps us quite a lot. The second piece is, the scalability is very high, So on month ends, you might need a certain volume, but on normal days, you don't need that kind of volume. So you can actually control the way you are spending money on technology. The third piece, which helped us is this whole innovation, which we can, look at really a truly composable architecture, like a symphony, or, the way you play music. Sometimes the guy with the guitar is playing, sometimes the piano comes in. So you can have a real composable architecture where we are mixing and matching things and actually delivering a good service for the consumer. So we've seen it evolve beyond, just cost, scale, and uptime.
Thank you, Abhijit. On the same topic, right, banking and financial institution are also governed by regulation, right? Regulatories are also coming in picture and also enabling in terms of thoughts about how do you adopt cloud and how do you move your workload. Your perspective, which is starting from you on this, how do we go, what's your views on the regulators, what they're demanding from banks or vice versa, to make this adoption of cloud in a banking system or environment around us more viable for the banks and of course for the consumers?
Yeah. Tough question to answer, and you can't be wrong in this one. But I think broadly, regulators looking at how the customer's data is secure, how you are available, what kind of choices you have made there. So I think largely, if you look at, if you choose the right cloud service provider, you have the right infrastructure for example, what's your landing zone architecture, how secure it is, all the security that you would have created on a data center, how do you replicate it on the cloud, so one is this whole security, which is a big thing in itself. Yeah. The second part is, around regulatory compliance, that, everything that you do on-prem, how can you replicate it onto the cloud? And I think the third bit is around, the user education as well as, and I think thanks to the new apps, etc., which have come in, which are mostly cloud-based, and we use it. So all of us also at the end of they are consumers, and we are seeing the benefit that, let's say, Zomato is getting, or, the day, I think we are watching World Cup on Hotstar, and it's able to really scale up, or World Cup, on Hotstar. I think people also see the advantages that it is bringing at scale. So some of our payments problems, be it UPI, etc., they can be resolved for organizations. So, so if you crystallize, 2-3 things. One is, the security part, the regulatory compliance, and general awareness which is happening in the market that cloud is actually good for financial services industry as well.
No, I think, see, what the regulators don't like is gray, right? You have to be black and white. I honestly feel that cloud is struggling in the bit. I don't think it is a regulator saying that don't go to cloud or any of those things. And again, in Asia, my experience has been everyone has said, fine. Okay, now something goes wrong. Now you tell me who's responsible. See, that's the challenge, right? Hotstar football match is a great example, right? We saw everything is fine, but imagine, you add, we had a case, 6 years back when I was working in a bank. That guy had around, 80 transactions during that month. So when he computed manually, he was off by 25 cents. The regulator said that, no, you have a problem, right? They don't see that it is only a 25-cent problem, right? Your accounting needs to be perfect because it is accuracy, right? So I honestly feel the regulators are helping to move. Again, I think that as an industry, we need to come when a problem happens because customers, when they lose their money, they're not going to be happy, right? I mean, because the systemic risk of banks, I think is still fundamentally cloud is not addressing. And in Malaysia, when I used to be there, I always used to say, how do we get the software industry under the purview of regulators? Regulators say, look, that's not my job, that's your job. But I think that's the challenge. I think where I feel this industry will evolve is somewhere regulators, some form of regulators will start looking at these things, and then we need to find a way to bridge these gap. But if we are very clear on what we are doing, if there is a problem, if we know how to address it, and bear in mind, 99.9% of the time we are right? Now the question is, how do we address that 0.1%? If you are able to do that, regulators don't have a problem.
Thank you.
So the Reserve Bank has been very, very sort of proactive, in my opinion, in actually championing the case for cloud, far from popular belief that the regulators don't like. It's quite the opposite. If you look at what they put out just about 2 months ago, maybe November, December, late October, November, it was a very comprehensive sort of guidelines on what it takes to move to cloud. And it starts by saying, please take advantage of the benefits that cloud has to offer. So it starts on that note. What they want everyone to be careful about is the customer's data and the entire governance around protecting that data. It's all easy and obvious to say, yeah, it's encrypted. What do you mean by it's all encrypted? Encryption means there is a key to that encryption. Someone is maintaining that key somewhere. Now, who's that someone? Where is that somewhere? And how is that someone maintaining the key somewhere? Okay, get down to the specifics of defining and detailing those aspects. Who has access to those keys? Okay, I mean, at the end of the day, even if your data is secure, segregated, whatever it is, you have administrators everywhere. How do you ensure that people outside of the regulated entity, as RBI calls it, do not have access to the data or to these security tools like keys and other systems that are used to encrypt the data even? So put these processes in place, both in terms of the systemic controls and the tools for that, as well as through contractual agreements and all of those legal provisions and those kinds of things. It is these aspects that are very sort of minutely, I would say, detailed in the form of guidelines. And that's exactly how RBI always does. They won't tell you prescriptions on what to do exactly as activities, but they'll give you the guidelines on what needs to be done and how to evidence that these have indeed been done whenever called upon to prove the same. That's really broadly what the regulator is expecting. Once we have that in place, they literally have absolutely no problem putting any piece of workload on the cloud at all. That's really how we see it.
Thank you, Adish. I think so. What I'm gathering is regulator is enabling the banks to go on cloud. The responsibility of banks is to have the data segregation security with the customer in the center of the whole thing. The security and the breach of the customer's information should not happen, and that's a key. And that brings to a topic of governance on data privacy, PI data, right, and security and regulatory compliance. Where do you see all this converging together in terms of a form?
Right. So there is already a whole layer of compliance around PII, the customer data privacy, the Consent Act and the consent object and the like, about what constitutes PII, how and where and when can PII be stored and shared with whom, under what circumstances, and so on and so forth. With the cloud, this just gets that much more sort of careful or stringent, just because this piece of information is now lying, although in a segregated manner, is lying in a public, or infrastructure. Uh, of course, the underlying assumption being data localization, etc., is being taken care of. But these specific aspects of, let's say, very importantly, the informed customer consent. It's not that you have a general, TNC's page which sees that if you have read this page, you've assumed that everything has been accepted. That's not okay, because no one's going to read that page, which is like millions of characters long, and understand anything out of it. So it has to be an informed consent wherever the customer's data is involved, that we inform the customer that we would like to share this piece of information with this entity for this purpose at this time, and are you explicitly okay with that or not? It's an explicit consent. So as long as those infrastructures and those guidelines are put in place, then these aspects are to be taken care of. The other important thing, of course, also being the digital payment security controls, the DPSCS, RBI put it out in 2021, which was effective from last year, which is going to the extent of saying that while it is kind of given and assumed that the bank's own apps and digital properties will indeed be secure, it's kind of assumed. What it also says is, what if the customer has some other app on the phone, like an AnyDesk or something, which is a potential malware? And how does the bank guard the customer from being affected due to the other app which is problematic? And it literally says the bank app needs to detect such objects on the customer's device and alert the customer. Obviously, the bank app cannot go and delete some other app, but it can at least alert the customer that it has detected certain potential troublesome objects on the device, and the customer might choose to take the appropriate action on those things. So it goes to that extent of controls on the customer's data. These things need to be ensured before we put the stuff in place.
Thank you, Abhijit. Ramesh, your views on
Again,
convergence of data?
I think I think all the points are covered. But I really think might be in the next 5 to 10 years, this whole space will change, is my view, right? Because if you see any of these Data Protection Act, the government excludes themselves. They are not part of it. They can lose data, right? I've seen this in pretty much all country, might be RBIs I've not seen. But that's the whole thing, right? Then I always think, why does the government exclude themselves from the whole act of how it needs to be there? I think what will happen in 5, 10 years is people will realize that, might be we are just, overreacting to so many of these things, where we will say data privacy will become some kind of, it will become obsolete. I think we will reach that stage, but I don't know what will trigger that, because it's going to be simply impossible with so much of digitization, so much of digital things coming into play. We cannot keep, building fence around it and, say that, look, I'm going to be 100% sure that this data doesn't exist. And I come from the card industry, we always joke, right? The time in which a card is embossed, pretty much the whole world knows what is there in that card, right? That's how that industry works. But I think more solutions will come, artificial intelligence will come. I think people will say that, okay, let's not worry too much about it. We know how to prevent if someone is using your data. I think that is where we need to go, because it has become very onerous these days, to build certain things, and none of these solutions are foolproof, right? So again, I'm saying, right, 99% of the time it works, but the 1% of the time it fails, we have failed. Once every data about mine has gone out, then it doesn't matter whether the second time, we fix it or do any of those things. So I hope that in the next 10 years we will reach that stage, but for now we have to do what we have to do.
Thank you. Abhijit, your views?
I think anyway, you have to deal with the hand we have been dealt with. Yeah, so technology is maturing as we move on. So with today's things, I think it's more around what practices you adopt, to prevent PII or data like this going out. You need to have probably very strong security controls, have a proper strategy of how do you have other people checking, or have a third party review, have a risk management process by which you are seeing what third party applications you are actually talking to and how do you control the risks and how do those things work. So there are a lot of those practices that one has to actually put in to make cloud as the core of, let's say, a financial services organization, or for any organization for that matter, And then last but not the least, if something, God forbid, happens, how do you reduce the damage? What's your disaster recovery plan? How many times, have you practiced it? How many times have you done the business continuity drills? So it's today become an amalgamation of all the activities that we were doing, let's say, on-prem. I think the same thing will get transported to cloud till, as I think you very rightly said, till we get some technology or, like a blockchain, my favorite topic, that, some way you can encrypt that source that nobody understands what's there and therefore cannot be misused. Yeah.
Thank you, Abhijit. I think on talking about RBI has enabled in one form the recommendation for the cooperative banks to go on cloud. And we all from technology companies and service companies, we are looking forward for entire banking to be on cloud. Do you think this is the stepping stone, Abhijit, to start with you, for a banking industry to have an environment which is urban cooperative bank to go on cloud and then start scaling it up to the larger banking industry?
Certainly, so, look at it, everything is today on cloud. You don't get Office anymore, on your computer. So the journey that is happening is almost slowly everything is going to cloud. Your desktop application is on the cloud. Most of the financial applications that we use in banking come with cloud version only. Oracle has stopped supporting, or the new versions of the OS are all coming cloud native. So I think the journey is anywhere to the cloud. For an urban cooperative bank, if somebody is able to provide the secure infrastructure, it actually is a great thing for them, to be on the cloud, which is in a managed way, and getting, these kind of services to all the citizens of the country. Means as long as the security is managed, I think it would be a great leap forward. And I'm sure, as we progress further, more and more security controls will come in. But given that it's an government-driven, regulator-driven initiative, due care will be taken for security as well.
I can completely agree, right? I mean, if you see most of the modern digital banks, which in any part of the world people have tried, pretty much it is cloud native, right? So I think it will definitely give access to people, in a much faster way where credit is required or any service is required. And in a way, it is not new, right? If you really take the credit bureaus, pretty much they've got the data of the entire nation, okay, at a single place. So I think if you take that same analogy, now if people are going to give certain services, certain functions, run your core, run your credit, I think it is a great way of getting, everyone into the system. I think it's a big stepping stone for financial inclusion in my view. And I think the key thing again, which we need to do is that during this process, we should not make big mistakes, because if you make, then it takes really a step back. So I think in the excitement, people should also ensure that whatever we spoke before on, regulation, reporting, data, all those things needs to be taken care and provide basic, simple services. I think it's a huge step forward.
Jagdish, your views?
Yeah. So
Mic is not working. You want to take this mic? Take this one.
sorry. So we were actually part of one of the discussions a year and a half ago, the early stages when RBI had come up with this idea of putting the urban cooperative banks on a cloud platform. And the drivers were very, very interesting to think of. It was very simple. The urban cooperative banks obviously would not have the technology might and the financial might to build and deploy and test all the different kinds of systems that they need to get into a fully digitized kind of platforms. Now, how to get them there? If they're just going to remain where they are, it's not going to go anywhere. And this was really the thought process that drove the regulator into thinking based on the earlier sort of experiment that they had done with CH and those kinds of things, right? A few years ago, to come up with this concept of saying, let's bring all of them together under one umbrella, or several of them together under one umbrella, give them a cloud-enabled platform wherein they can sort of very quickly enable themselves on already pre-tested solutions so that they don't have to go through the same process which they can't go through of development, testing, implementation, rollout, and so on and so forth. It cuts down on their cycles, their cost, and hence their ability to get down to delivering these services. Because the beauty of these urban cooperative banks is wherever they operate, they're pretty strong because they operate in those specific areas. But it's just that they can't offer some of the other digital services that others can just because of these other points. And this is a measure to try and address these aspects of that. And that's, I think, a great initiative. And I'm sure the regulator will watch it carefully and see how it unfolds. And as it unfolds, they'll take it to a wider spectrum.
That's a good insight for me also, of course, because when you see it from the technology point of view, it looks very simple and go and adopt that. But from inclusion point of view, how do you enable the growth and the approach to a larger community in the system? Technology, how is it going to play a role with the banks like urban cooperative banks, which does not have a scale to go and expand further, but they have a strength of handling the customers across. Thank you for that. We spoke about RBI, we spoke about everything together, and we have a lot of ecosystem around us. Now, I believe, and I want to take your views also on that, is all the ecosystem on fintechs and modern banks and all, what the role cloud is going to play in terms of enabling this ecosystem to work together and get the benefit across for banks and partners of the ecosystem, of course for the customers also.
Sure. Again, I think the whole drive has been to bring in the ecosystem into the whole thing. I mean, if you look at thing as obvious as UPI or ONDC or any of these platforms, right, where the Aadhaar-based VKYC platforms and everything, AEPS, all of that stuff, it is about saying, take banking out of the bank offices. And or financial services need not be confined to the offices and the servers of the banks or the financial systems alone. There is a play in it for everyone. There are certain specific aspects that are limited to the traditional banking license holders, whereas there is a whole lot of services around it, not in the least the customer experience, the whole sort of integration with all the merchants, the ecosystem players, etc., which can be completely democratized, and that can bring in all the fintech players into the picture. So it's basically, in fact, I mean, not just the fintech players, I would say literally every merchant, right? I mean, the whole concept of saying every tiny shop through an ONDC kind of construct can become an online provider without really needing to invest in infrastructure to have online inventory and online sales, checkout processes and things like that. They can literally become an online shop. So the idea is that to bring everybody into the ecosystem through these providers, and then to use all the partners as the enablers to bring these different pieces together and bring them into an integrated whole. So I think this whole construct is driven towards sort of bringing the whole ecosystem together.
No, I think absolutely right. I mean, without cloud, I don't think we can even imagine bringing these ecosystems together, right? It's almost impossible. So I think the key thing which we also need to really do is, now there are just a lot of moving parts, okay? And we need to reach a stable state soon. I think we are making too many changes and too many experimentation, and a lot of the innovations is also very incremental. Right? I'm telling more from a cloud and infrastructure and even an innovation perspective. I mean, if you really look at UPI and all, there are very, very simple, but really scalable and has a wide-ranging impact. And those are all turning points in history, right? But I think we need to settle down to a certain ecosystem, be with that ecosystem for at least a relatively some time before we move on to the next thing. Because if we keep on changing everything, it actually confuses everyone, and then people, and then mistakes happen, and then you lose confidence in the system. So I think the trick is, how does these ecosystem becomes very stable, right? And then when you move from ecosystem 1 to ecosystem 2, we just do it so seamlessly that the customer or the regulator, no one knows about it. And again, technology is the only thing which can help there, because I don't think you can do a process or a regulation to control this. Now we need to see what kind of technology will come so that these things are managed extremely well. And innovation, we don't do it in an incremental way, but much more in a meaningful way.
I think, banks will always be doing payment services, yeah? In the end, payment, balance, etc. So while we do get carried away, that there will be X ecosystem and bank starts to orchestrate that, practically regulators may not really like the bank to do, for example, if you are giving a car loan, organize test drive of a car. So that's not going to happen. Yeah. So somewhere I think banks are already in a way integrated with various providers, be it, paying on Amazon, you are integrated via the credit card process, or, so banks are already integrated. I think as we move forward with systems moving to the cloud, there may be more integrations. But beyond that, to my mind, in the short term, till the charter of banks does not change and banks are allowed to do test drives of cars and things like that, mostly it will be payment services, account services, etc., which will be there. So I do see this area evolving, but not very gung-ho that, all of a sudden something great will happen.
Okay, so the ecosystem, what we're talking about, I think is more about collaboration and integration together. And what I gather from you is about cloud giving the platform for integration altogether to this and making enabling for everyone, right? You can't operate in a dispersed form. Toward the end now, I want to get your views about and experience about with the audience here, and also for me also, of course. Your experience about adoption of cloud, whatever, small form, big form, learning out of that, any guidance for the audience here. And also part 2 of the question is that the multi-cloud, as we talk about, and also the hybrid cloud, right? The old traditional world and the new world. Is it going to coexist? What's your view about this? Abhijit, you want to start from here, or maybe Jagdish?
So we've just kind of dabbled a bit with the cloud. I wouldn't say that we are headlong into it. We have done a few things, trying to understand what works, how it works, what doesn't work. And clearly, what's clear is that we need to take into account a lot of the governance aspects upfront. It's very hard to put something on the cloud without taking into account these factors and then realizing that you need to go and correct it. It's very, very hard to do it. It's hard to do it if it is on your own premise. It's even harder to do it if it's once on the cloud, because then there is no guarantee of what's gone where by that point in time. So those governance things need to be put in place as a framework right up front before moving the workloads onto the cloud. But yes, once done, there is benefit, absolutely, by way of scalability, elasticity, availability of all the platforms, tools, literally on demand. So your productivity just goes up like anything. Of course, again, the architectural governance again needs to be put in place so that you don't get carried away by everything that's there on the cloud, because everything is available on the cloud technically. So you can literally, on the fly, someone can literally go and pull anything in. So there needs to be reasonable architectural governance to put some sort of checks and balances in place so that we take the right things in the right way and not just pull in everything because it's there, it's just out there. These are the primary sort of learnings that I would think that we would need to adopt. And yeah, I mean, what's the second part?
The second part was that a multi-cloud and hybrid cloud.
All right. So yeah, I think the more we go along, I think that is another thing that might be there, because there are certain aspects which might be specific to certain clouds, certain pieces of it's again like the old, I harp back to the old database world, where you could use a standard sort of SQL standard and then all databases will comply to it. But the moment you start using certain specific tools that one database gives you, then you're tied down to that database. Likewise on the cloud as well, there are no cloud standards which are common to all clouds. So each cloud gives you its own tools. And the moment you start using those tools, then you're kind of tied to that cloud, which happens in the case of several applications. And hence, you might end up having a situation where a certain app, much as you do not prefer to go beyond one cloud, there may be the odd application which you may get support only on certain versions or certain cloud, and hence you'll have to figure out how to deal with that integration, which is different than all the others. Which means that if it's a real-time integration, then you need to figure out how the transactions will move from one place to the other. Then the DRs and the BCPs, the whole works really. And of course, underpinning that is also the paperwork, the legal part, and all of that kind of stuff as well. So that also needs to be factored in. But I think that is a bit of a reality. So when we drop the architectural frameworks, it's better to be prepared for that eventuality, especially in financial services where you have a huge number of systems, even to process one single transactions. So that's kind of partially inevitable, I would think.
Thank you.
I think, when we started the discussion of cloud, it was very clear. It was public cloud 10 years back, right? So then I think when we could not solve the problem fully, we said, let's go hybrid cloud, right? Because we're very impatient, in trying to get a proper solution. But what is very surprised to me is that we have carried over that concept for so long, and now we are doing patchwork. Like to exactly his point, right? If you're an hybrid cloud, if I know that I'm not going to change that component, it is going to be there forever. So as cloud evolves, you're having one piece which is going to really stop doing you from, to do magical things. So I think we need to, again, look at this whole thing in context, try to solve some of these problems as to why do we need even hybrid cloud. I think if there is a solution which is present and everything can move, the industry, end user will move. And another thing always, banks will never have a problem in terms of spending money on technology. Okay? The problem we have is that we don't know how to, show that all these things have made an impact somewhere else. That's the real challenge. And, as I said, we have outages here and there, we have problems here and there, and that doesn't go well with the customer or the management or the regulator. I think we should really find proper solutions. We should really try to remove that hybrid over a period of time. And the challenge you're also going to have is, today, those kind of components which are fairly old, I think that workforce also will go away in some time. You never know why this component works this way, and we are already seeing it, right? Might be mainframes will survive on that because I think, there are enough people who still, have knowledge doing it. So I think we need to bridge that gap. Then I think it's a much easier story. And in my experience, if you need elasticity, if you need to scale up, the only way is cloud, right? When we run e-commerce business, we have seen, right? We used to have, someone will say you'll get X transaction in 15 minutes. We used to get 10X, right? But in the next 2 minutes, the 10X is processed. There is no way you can do it in the normal situation. So I think that's what my view would be.
I think my experience of cloud journey has been, it's like a basic management use case which used to study in college, that you really need to start with a real strategy. What's your strategy? Why are you going to cloud? Sometimes in this journey, what happens, we sometimes underestimate the time it's going to take, because cloud and agile, two words go well together. And management sometimes feel agile means fast, but we realize that agile needs a lot of work to actually deliver. So I've always felt, that first, why are you going? The management should be clear. These are the 3-4 goals that I'm looking for. This is the timeline. In most of our day-to-day IT work, the CISO is invited last to the party. In cloud, actually, you should come first, because if he comes last, there is more problem. So we felt that, invite the CISO to the party much before then you start doing anything. Look at all your infrastructure, because, organizations have been working for 40, 50 years, and many of them may not be compatible, and you need to rewrite many of these applications. And therefore, the timeline management is very important. What is the kind of project plan you present? And lastly, no matter what you do as a CIO, CTO, CDO, at some point your shelf life will be questioned, and you should have a proper business case on what's the benefit that this whole movement has actually got to the organization. So I think right from day one, set in the right cost metrics, return metrics in place, and monitor it, because you will not know by the time you spend the money, your shelf life is over, and people might ask you what is the benefit you got out of moving to cloud.
Thank you, Abhijit. So, summary, just for our discussion, which I learned it out together, the architecture, transparency, collaboration among internally, including security, CISO, and the external ecosystem also is a part of play, and regulators are enabling the cloud journey on this. And the way we go forward is more of inclusion of and customer as a center of the everything altogether. Thank you, Jagdish, for your insight, Ramesh and Abhijit. Thank you for your time. Thank you.